So just give me 10 seconds and we'll start real quick. This webinar is called Building with Node.js on SingleStore, and we have Matt, who is also my manager from the team, and is the head of growth engineering here in SingleStore. We are very happy to have you here. And Matt has actually solved a lot of automation related problems for us. So definitely you all are in good hands. And hopefully I'll also learn something new today from the expert that we have. And yeah, I think we are live streaming now, so that's good. All right, thanks for joining this webinar. Matt, you would like to share your screen now.
Yes, let me see if I can share the right one here. It seems like I might have to restart my
Oh, no,
Zoom
please feel free
actually.
to join again. It's all
One
right.
sec, let me see if this gives us the right one here. Share. Yeah, one sec. Let me see. First time
Until you
using
figure
Zoom.
out, we can actually feel free to join back again. It's all right.
Sure,
I
I'll
can.
join back in 1 second here. Yes, on the
No worries
fly.
at all. So tomorrow we are presenting a similar topic with Alex, who is our growth engineer here in SingleStore and a colleague of mine. He's going to present building a full stack Next.js AI app, and that's tomorrow. And on October 30th, we are presenting developing a Gen AI application with SingleStore Helios on AWS and Anthropic. This is a partner webinar. So if this topic is interesting to you, feel free to tune in for uh, the future sessions. And today, we will welcome you all to have a hands-on experience during this webinar that as Matt is building, you can also use his resources. I will be putting the link to the GitHub. Matt, you have the GitHub link, right?
I do, yes, yes. I actually just Slack it over to
Awesome.
you, so you can feel
So
free
yeah,
to share it with the folks.
all right. So we'll be sharing that with you, and I'll give you a link to try out, and you can use your data and experience this in real time. And yeah, that's how you'll make the most of the session. And lastly, my name is Yukti. One of my main jobs here at SingleStore is to organize these weekly AI webinars. So stick around. We also have a Q&A button that is present in a bottom in the on the bottom of your console, and currently you are in a listen only mode. And if you have any questions, feel free to use that. We will actually have a dedicated Q&A by the end of the session. But if you have any questions, like if you want to have a discussion, feel free to use that button, and we can all interact. So yeah, Matt, please take it away, and thanks everyone for joining.
Awesome. Let me once again just do this, presenter view, and I will share my screen here. So used to Google Meet. Let's see here. There we go. Share. All right, let's get started here. So as Yukti mentioned, my name is Matt Tanner. I am the head of growth engineering here at SingleStore. And today we're going to walk through a very practical approach to using SingleStore and building on Node.js. Now, there's going to be a lot of beginner stuff in here, as well as some intermediate and advanced stuff. Essentially, what I'm going to do is build a simple API with Node. We're then going to infuse that with some SingleStore functionality. And then if all goes well, I'm going to show you how to deploy this API on Vercel. And part of this actually comes from a little side project that I was working on a few months back, where I realized you can actually use Vercel to host Node.js projects, including like most people use it for Next and stuff like that, but you can also host APIs on there. So I'm going to show you how to do that today too. Some of you may already know how to do this, but it's something that I found, and it's quite useful for spinning up API infrastructure. So what is our agenda today? First, I'm going to take you through what is SingleStore. If you're not familiar with what the SingleStore platform offers, I'll give you a brief introduction to that. I'm then going to go into why you would build with Node.js on SingleStore. Then we'll look at the SingleStore client, which is going to make building a lot easier. We'll go through a demo, and then if we have some time at the end, we can go to a Q&A. And if you noticed, I forgot the the image there. So what is SingleStore? SingleStore is a database, and I'm relatively new to the company, so let me kind of give you my spin on it. When I have built stuff in the past, I've usually used a large data stack. I might use something like MySQL, I might use Redis, I might use Databricks, Snowflake. I might use a massive amount of data infrastructure there. Now, SingleStore does work well with those technologies as well, but you can do a lot of stuff within the platform. So in terms of key product capabilities, as a primary application database or as an analytics database, you can use both of those and they're very infused together. Part of these key product capabilities are universal storage, speed. So we're an extremely fast database. We also allow for really fast ingestion. Why have the speed for analytics if you can't ingest data quickly? This is kind of a nice synergy between that. We also have bottomless storage. So similar to other platforms, we have this separation between storage and compute, but it's still within a unified platform. One thing that might interest some folks that are in the Node.js realm, Mean and Mern, a lot of folks use MongoDB. We can actually use those technologies as well within SingleStore. So we have SingleStore Kai, which allows us to do analytics on the Mongo data. But if you're using some type of ORM or ODM, you can, like Mongoose, for instance, you can use that with our Kai API as well. So you don't have to change your underlying code. We also support this multi-model approach, which I'll go into a little bit further, but it includes one of the more popular uses of this includes like vectors, using us as a vector database. You can run us anywhere. So hybrid, multi-cloud, SaaS, on-premise. Today, I'm going to show you how to use Helios, which is our database as a service platform. And then we also have this intelligence piece too, so if you're building generative AI, if you want to play around with notebooks, you can do all of that within SingleStore. When it comes to multi-model capabilities, here's kind of a high-level look at what we can do. So relational, geospatial, unstructured, full text search, key value, JSON document, time series, vector functions. You can start to see why, when I mentioned replacing or building on SingleStore, you're able to kind of bring together a lot of these technologies and different models instead of going to different platforms. Now, this doesn't seem to be rendering correctly here. Let me see. Oh, that's why. Okay, awesome. So with SingleStore, you can do quite a few things here. So first, you have our universal storage engine. Then if you're using this for analytics, or if you have a primary application database somewhere else, you can do fast ingest and CDC into the platform. I'm not going to cover that today. I'm going to show you how to use it as a primary application database, but it is possible to do that. Now, you can run this on anything. So AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, on-premise, run it anywhere. And obviously, if you run it as a managed service or as a self-managed service, you can do both. We also have those stored data types, like I mentioned, with the multi-model stuff. And what we're going to be looking at today is mostly this sector here, which is applications. So we're going to be building this API application. It's going to leverage a little bit of AI functionality in the background, but we're going to be using it as a primary application database. The benefit to this is that we also get this real-time analytics as part of the platform. So we have real-time analytics. We can build dashboards, ad hoc queries, machine learning. All of this is available right within SingleStore. Now, why would you build Node.js applications on SingleStore? The main thing that I see here from a, let's say a very early stage startup perspective, or you've got some ideas that you want to validate, and then you want to be able to scale it up, is our SingleStore Helios offering. So you can easily spin up a database in moments. Most of you are probably familiar with this in terms of database as a service. It's a really quick way to get projects up and running, whether personal, business, or even enterprise projects can run on the platform. The nice part is that it can seamlessly scale as the application does. So what we're going to build today will work on Helios. But as you start to build it up, you're going to be able to scale it without having to, spend a whole bunch of money, manage a bunch of different platforms. You can do that all within our single platform. And lastly is this primary application database plus much more. So what generally tends to happen as we build applications is we go, oh, it'd be really nice to use our data to do X or to do Y. And usually that means that we need to bring in a new platform to do that. We don't have to do that with SingleStore Helios or SingleStore in general. We can do it all in one place. Now, this is a really cool quote that I found on our website, which is from Jack Ellis, who's the co-founder of Fathom Analytics, where he talks about how they used SingleStore Helios to drop Redis, DynamoDB, and MySQL, and they're able to save on the monthly costs while also getting improved performance. This is kind of the epitome of what we are trying to do here at SingleStore. We're trying to create a platform where you can do all of these things in a single place. Now, another reason would be SingleStore Kai. So if you're building in Mongo right now and you want to move into something that can facilitate more models, you can use Kai to do that. So SQL and NoSQL in one place, and then MongoDB compatible. So if you're using, the most popular one would probably be Mongoose, you can then keep the code as it is, but then connect to SingleStore and still use that same protocol. Now, as part of our build on Node.js today, we're going to be looking at the SingleStore client. Now, this is something that we've worked on in the growth engineering team to push out, and it's allowing folks to build more efficiently, especially in Node.js, and hopefully we'll expand that to other languages and frameworks as well. Now, why would you use it? Firstly, easy database connectivity. If you've used SingleStore before and you were using a client, you probably used the MySQL 2 client, which really is based for MySQL. Now, even though we're MySQL Wire compatible, we still have functionalities that go beyond that. This is why we built this client. So it allows us to use a lot of those internal SingleStore capabilities, but in a single new client. And we also have some nice AI helper functionality too, because we know a lot of folks on SingleStore are building AI applications. So how does it work? First, you initialize and connect. And I put a little code snippet here on the side just to show you how easy it is. I'll walk through this in the code as well. But it's as simple as doing an npm install. You install the SingleStore client, and you can see here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not, but you'll start here. Then you initialize the client. Then you do the connection, similar to what you would do with MySQL 2 if you are using that to connect to SingleStore. And then you have your database object. Once you have that database object there, you can then start to interact with the database. I'll just give you one example here where we have an expenses table and we're doing an update operation on it. We pass it some values and then we can pass it a object of parameters here. So instead of doing, pure SQL calls in this, we get a nice interface that allows us to interact with the database in a more node-friendly way. You can still do all of the raw SQL queries if you want to, but this is a little bit easier to read and a little bit easier to work with as well. Now, part of what we talk about in a lot of other webinars is RAG capabilities and AI capabilities. We can also do that as well with these pre-built AI helper functions. So you can see here that we brought in, if I go back to the other slide, you'll see that we created this AI object that comes from the SingleStore AI package. And we can use that here and use the .chatCompletions.create method to actually do a little bit of RAG and AI infusion here into our app as well. And this is actually straight from the application that I'm going to be walking you through today. Then we can do expense table.find and then inject those queries into the where clause. Now, hopefully I went through that quick enough for you. Let's actually dive into the code. I'll kind of explain the background of this. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to come to SingleStore. And if you go to our main site, or Yukti, I think you're going to have a link that you're going to send out as well. If I go to singlestore.com, or please click on the link that Yukti is going to send out as well, you can do start free. And then you'll be sent over to our cloud trial page. I'll put in my name here. SingleStore.com. And then I will create my account. Should work for me there. Let's see. Awesome. Toss in my company name here. I'm located in Canada. I'll click continue. I'll just use this password here. And actually, let's do this. Suggest strong password. Sure, that will work. Of course, in the demo, I get hit with this. All right. There we go. All right, perfect. Then you'll get your verification code, which should come through to me here in a moment. Let's check and see in my email. And I will bring that back over here, toss in my verification code. That is not the one. Let's see if that copy and paste worked for me this time. There we go. Click agree, continue. And so I can choose to skip this or I can fill this out. I'm going to say that today I'm using MySQL. However, we can help guide you based on the data stack that you select here. I'm going to spin up a starter workspace. So this is going to be our free workspace. I'm going to spin that up in AWS. And then I will do explore on my own. And at this point, I have something already spun up here. And what I'm going to do is come over to deployments. And you'll see that by default, it's going to create a database for me. I need to connect to this database. So I'm going to click on the connect button here. Then I'll do your app. I need to create a user for this. So this user is going to be generated here. Now I could flip this to whatever I wanted. I'm going to make this a little bit easier with my password just so that for demonstration purposes. And then I will grab this. I'll create this user. And you'll see now that if I go to include full code example and pick Node.js, these are all of the details that I'm going to need to plug into my Node.js application. From here, I'm going to go and stop my screen share for a second. And then I will share my VS Code. And let's see, there we go. Perfect. Share. And let me move this into the middle here. Now, if you pull down the repository that we shared, you'll actually see all of this code, which should pretty much work out of the box. What you'll need to do is you'll need to, in this .env.example, you'll need to create a copy of that and just call it .env. In this .env, this is where I'm going to input all of my database connectivity stuff that we just went over in the previous screen. So instead of flipping back and forth between screen shares, I'm going to populate this over. But if you still have the screen up, you'll be able to reference all of that. So let me quickly open this up here. And Chrome seemed to have closed my tab there. So restore window. There we go. Now, if you're back in SingleStore, you're going to be able to get this DB host, DB user. The DB port should be 3333 unless somehow your deployment is different, but you'll be able to see that in the UI. And let me start to move some of this stuff over. So first is my host. I'll grab that, paste it there. So it should be something similar to this. And then it's going to end with svc.singlestore.com. Then you'll keep your port the same. You'll have your user that you created, the DB name, which if you used a generated one that gets generated by default, that will be there as well. That's going to show up in that pane that I showed you earlier. And I'll go back to that in a second just to show you. And then you'll have your DB password. So that's going to be the password for your user, which in my case was test123. And now you'll see that I also have an OpenAI API key. That's because I'm going to do a little bit of AI connectivity as well I've populated it with my personal key, but feel free to go and grab yours and populate it there as well. Make sure that this is saved. Once this is saved, we're going to use something that we created in this lib folder here, which is the load.js. Now, within this load.js, let me quickly go over the code here so you can see exactly what we're doing. First, we've brought in a CSV parser because we created a data set through ChatGPT, exported it as a CSV, and we're going to load that into our instance that we just spun up on Helios. Now, you don't have to do this, but it gives us a little bit of data to play with, which is a bit more fun from a demo perspective. We're using the SingleStore client here, which if I come over to this DB file, this db.js, you can see that I'm bringing in AI, I'm bringing in SingleStore client, and both of these are coming from SingleStore packages. I'm also going to use file system, path, and then we're going to use the .env, which I've created here as well. We have our two instances of our AI client and then our actual database client itself. Then, since we're using shared tier, we have to have this SingleStore_bundle.pem, and we're going to need to grab that and inject that into our connection here. So client.connect, similar to the MySQL2 package that you may have used in the past, you'll see that we're filling out all the details. Most of these are coming from that .env file that we just populated. And then we're going to bring in that cert as well. Now you can see by default, I have the SingleStore_bundle.pem here. If you're using shared tier, you're going to need to get that. So let me actually share with you just to show you exactly how to get that. We'll do, oh, darn, that's not what I meant to do. Go, okay. And let me share over on this side, share my Chrome tab again. Now we need that .pem file. That .pem file, easy to get, but not always super intuitive to get to. So if you're using shared tier, you're going to need this .pem file. You can grab that from right here. So when you come back here, you're in your deployments, connect, just like you did before, your app, we're using Node.
Matt,
Easier.
just interject for a second. We
Sure.
have a small feedback about your pace. Just can you go a little slower so it's easier for people to follow up?
Oh, okay.
Is that
Some
all right?
folks are actually following along live. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Please.
Yeah, is there any particular piece that you want me to go back to? I didn't know that anybody was directly following along. So let me reiterate anything that you want clarity on. If not, I'll actually keep going right now. But if there is something you want me to double click on, let me know and I'll go back over it with you. So if you're looking to get that .pem, you'll want to click on this here on the certificate, and that will then download that .pem for you. You'll then take that, if I stop share, you're going to take that and move that back over into your VS Code. Since we're going to deploy this on Vercel, makes it a little bit easier to just drop it directly into this lib folder here. Okay, so that's how I got this SingleStore_bundle. And that's what we inject here into this cert path. Let me make this slightly bigger so people can see a bit better as well. Then we have this database object that we have that is fully connected to our database that we just spun up on Helios. Now with load, if I come back to this file, we are going to grab that database instance here. And then you'll see that we're going to do this async load. So if there already is an expenses table, we are going to drop it. Now, if it's brand new, you're not going to have this, but if you run this multiple times, important for us to have this. Then we'll do the table.create, and this is going to create the table, and you can see the syntax for creating tables with the SingleStore client. Then after that table is created, we're going to load the data set. So you can see here that what we're doing is we're doing a file system.create read stream, and we're reading in this dataset.csv. The dataset.csv, very simple, looks just like this. It's going to include a created at, a merchant, a category, and an amount. This data set specifically is for essentially financial transaction or personal transaction data is what it's going to look like. In all fairness, it's very excessive, and you're going to laugh at some of the amounts that come up, but it does demonstrate what we're trying to do here. Now, once we read that in, we are then going to load that into the database. So you can see here, we've got a results array. We're pushing in that data. Then once that results array is populated, we're then going to insert that data set. And this should run relatively quick. To run this, once you've plugged in your .env variables, to run this, you'll do node and then load.js. And if you want to go back over this, you can always take a look at the README here. Oh, it's run load. Okay, perfect. Good thing I checked. The README has everything that you need to get this started. The .env, and then you'll need to make sure if you're pulling down the project for the first time to do the npm install. That's one thing I didn't have to do because I already have it running locally. Then we're going to run this load right now. So we'll do node run, npm run load. And that is actually aliased in our package.json. You can see here that we have this in our scripts here. So we're just running npm run load, and it's going to run this node lib load.js, which I was going to do directly. So if I run this, let's hope that it works. If the demo gods are with us, it should. And it should run here for a moment. And right now it is loading our data in the background. It's a relatively large data set. It's not huge, but we're running each insert statement individually just for easier debugging. So as that is going, I'm going to show you kind of what we're going to power with this data. And that is going to live within our app.js. Now, in an ideal world, you would obviously have this project much more spread out. You might have a routes folder, you might have a models folder, all of this type of stuff. But for our purposes of today, we have everything just in app.js. So just a little bit easier to navigate from a demo perspective. But if you do start to build on this, definitely look at best practices in terms of building out your Node.js APIs or your Node.js project in general. So at the top of the app.js, you can see our includes. Make sure you do the npm install. You're going to pull in a lot of the things that you need here. We've got Express, so we're going to be using the Express framework to build on this Node.js API. We also are bringing in this chat completion tool from the SingleStore AI package. We're using Zod as well, and that you can see actually, if I go to Z, you can see that I'm using it in a few places here. If I come up to the top here, you'll also see that I'm bringing in the AI and database objects from our /lib/db, which is what we went over earlier. We create our Express app, and because we're going to be parsing JSON bodies, we need to make sure that we use the .use express.json. And then I also have this here as well to make sure that we're handling errors correctly. This is where we start to get into the SingleStore portion of it. So let me give you a high level, and then we'll dig into what we're doing on each of these endpoints. We've essentially created a CRUD application. So create, read, update, delete. We have a /expenses endpoint. That is a get endpoint. That is going to retrieve all of our data that we have. Then we can also get an expense based on the ID of the expense. So every expense has a transaction ID associated with it. We have that endpoint as well. We also have a put here, which is /expenses/ID. And that is going to allow us to update the expense. And then we have a delete endpoint here, which is /expenses/ID, which will then delete the record. Now, one thing just to mention on the delete, you may not want to have a hard delete here. You may actually just want to update the record and maybe just flag it as archived. We don't do that here, but if you need auditability, the easiest way to do that is to not do a hard delete, just do a soft delete. And if you want more information on that, we can chat about that in the Q&A as well. So we've essentially here used all of the basic CRUD stuff that we want to do. And I'll go into this other stuff in a moment here. But first, let's just look at this here. In our get endpoint, you can see that firstly, we're connecting to the expenses table. So we create an object for the expense table, a variable for it. Then we do database.table.use expenses. And this is our expenses table that got created in our load here. So you can see we created the table, expenses, and these are the columns it's going to have. If I come back here, you can then see that from that expenses table, firstly, from the query string, I'm grabbing the merchant and category if they're supplied. Then here, you'll see that I'm doing rows, expenses table.find, and I'm passing the where clause in here. So where the merchant and the category equal whatever was passed in the query parameter. The same thing, similar here with the get for the ID. Here we grab the ID, then we do expenses table.find where ID is equal to request.params.id. So these endpoints, both very similar. One uses a query string and the other one uses an explicit ID to get that expense. Where this might be useful, just an FYI. So if you're wondering why I put both those in, you may have a feed that you're putting, like let's think about if you're looking in your personal banking, you're going to have all your expenses in one spot, but you may want to click on a specific expense and grab more data for it. That is where you would use it by a specific ID. Just depends how you want to do things. Then we have our put here, which also takes an ID in the URI parameter. And we'll see expenses table.update. Then we pass values to it, which comes from the request body. And then we're also going to pass the ID. So values, and then this would be the where clause, essentially, within, if we're thinking in general SQL terms. The delete works the same way here. So expense table.delete ID, and we get that from the params.id, which is right here. So if we go to run this, just with our CRUD endpoints in place, I will do, if we come back to our README, if you want to run this, you can do npm run start, and now I can see here that my server is running on port 3000. Now, let's hop over to Postman, or you can use Insomnia or whatever you have that you can actually use to dispatch API requests through. Feel free to use that. I am going to run this through Postman, so I will stop my share for a second and then bring up the Postman interface here. And we'll actually create a new one. And we'll do HTTP : :// Now I already have something here, so I'll do expenses get. And if you come back to the README, you can see a couple examples that we have there. The first one here is just going to be exactly this. And if I click send, and I can do, yeah, pretty perfect. You'll see here that that data that we loaded with that load.js script is now there, and I'm pulling that data back through my Node.js API, pulling it back into the response here. We can see that we have an ID created at, a merchant, a category, and an amount. And I have, I think, about 20,000 records here. So lots of data to play with in terms of that. Now, let's say that I wanted to filter on a particular expense. I'm still going to use a get, but this time I'm going to supply two params in as query parameters. So you can see now that I've got my question mark to denote that I'm going to have a query parameter there. And then I have merchant equal to Airbnb and category equal to travel. And if I send this, we can now see that in the results, I have only Airbnb and travel there. So pretty basic stuff here, but this is core functionality that most people need when they're building out a full application, right? We can also look it up by ID. So if I grab a particular ID, I can also do expenses slash and then supply an ID, and I will only get that particular record. And if I wanted to update the record, I could then change this to a put and then supply some new parameters here in the body, which I won't actually get into, but we could do that. So we could pass it as JSON. We could also delete an expense too. So I will actually delete this expense. Oh, and there we go. Our first error. Okay, so I won't go into the details of debugging that one, but let's take a look at the next thing that we're going to touch on, which is actually going to be using some of the AI functionality that we have in the client as well. So if I flip back over to my code here, I'm going to stop this from running. And you can see in the app.js that we have two methods here. One is a post expenses slash search. And then we have one that expenses slash ask. Now, the search one, if we look at the README, they're somewhat similar, but a little bit different. What you can do with this is if you call out to expenses slash search, you can give it a query. So instead of saying, similar to what we had before, where we say merchant, Airbnb, category, travel, we can now do more of a search. So I want to know everything where travel with Airbnb. And if we look at how this is implemented, we can kind of break that down. So first, we get our table schema. And using the SingleStore client, we're using expense table dot show columns info. And that's going to pull back our schema here. Then we're going to use that AI object that we created, the dot chat completions dot create. And here we pass an object, which includes the model we want to use and the prompt. Here you can see user prompt, which is the actual query that's going to come in, which would be travel with Airbnb in this case. Then we see the table schema, which is going to come in from here when we queried that earlier. Then we have our prompt. Based on the table schema, parse the user's input into parameters, include only the JSON value without any formatting in your response to make it ready for use with the JS JSON.parse method. If there is an issue, return an empty JSON value. So when we run this, we then get our completion.content field that will have the result, and we pull out the category, merchant, and amount. Then we'll run expenses table.find, and we will find all of those transactions that meet that category, merchant, and amount. Then we'll return those rows back. What does it look like in actual practical use? Let's share our Postman instance again here. Do share. And then I already have one of these queued up. Actually, that's the ask one. Let me do post. Now, if you're wondering why I'm using post instead of get, because technically this is a get request. What I want to do is I don't necessarily want to have a really, really long query string. And if I have a more complex search, it could get quite long. I would rather have that in the JSON body. So if I'll show you what it looks like here in a second. So we have our post. Our endpoint will look like this, /expenses/search. Then our query will look like this. So travel with Airbnb. Of course, I could have put this into the query string as well, which you can see what that would look like. But as it gets longer, it might not look as nice. So I prefer to have it in post. However, if you did implement this as a get, you'd be fine there as well. I'll click send. Oh, and I don't have the server up. One sec here. Let me pull it back up here. Okay, it's running on port 3000. Let's send this. And here we have our results. So we said travel with Airbnb. The return that we get back is essentially the same as what we did earlier, where we actually kind of hard-coded in the parameters. However, now we could do a search. So if we had a search bar in our UI and they put in travel with Airbnb, it's then going to interpret that and then bring back those results. So kind of a AI light type of application. However, it makes search, which is one thing that can be generally hard to implement, quite easy to do in a few lines of code there. Now, what I also want to show you is this ask functionality as well. So this here, we're going to create this endpoint, which looks like expenses/ask. And there, we're actually able to supply a kind of natural language query. So how much have I spent on travel and where has that money been spent? You can already see the result because I've run this before, but let me show you what that looks like in the code, and then we can play around with it for a minute. So share, we'll come back to the code here. And in the code, you can see that we have our app.post expenses/ask endpoint. Here, we grab our query from the request body. Then we have this query table tool. So it's an instance of the chat completion tool. And this tool here is going to generate and execute a MySQL select query based on natural language prompt, adhering to the provided table schema. And then what we'll do is we're going to grab some of those params and inject those into the prompt as well. Here is our actual call. So we'll grab the schema first. Then we have our GPT query. Here we'll do the AI.chatCompletions.create, similar to what we were doing up here. But then what we'll do is we're going to do a little bit more. So stream false. So we want everything to come back as a single response. Model, the prompt, and then we also give it a system role here. MySQL database expert, generate a valid MySQL select query based on the following schema. The query must adhere to these rules, only select operations, and respond with the MySQL query only. For those familiar with using the GPT type stuff, you know that you have to be quite explicit. So this allows us to make sure that when the response comes back, we can actually parse it correctly. And then here you can see that if it does return something, we then issue that database.query, which comes from that GPT query.content. And then we store the JSON.stringify the rows, which come back as a value. And then we return that. Then we have this secondary piece, which allows us to kind of format it better, which is AI chat completions.create. Here we have our GPT-4o model that we're going to use. Prompt is going to be the query itself that we brought back in the previous piece here. So you can see query, which came from the request body. Stream false, system role, and then we have this query table tool that we defined above here. Then once this runs, we will get the output that I'm going to show you. This is going to allow us to use that natural language to allow our users to actually query the data versus being a little bit more explicit. So let's see what we can do here. We haven't tested this super heavily, so let's see what we can kind of push out of this. Here, come back over to Postman here. Now, the base one that you're going to see is this. How much have I spent on travel, and where has the money been spent? So when we run that, we see in the bottom here that spent a total of $452,000 on travel. And that breakdown of where that's been spent, they've spent $107,000 on Uber, $268,000 on Airbnb, and $75K on Amazon for travel. So they're obviously getting paid quite well, or they have massive credit card bills. But if we go and we try to tweak this a bit, we can say, let's say entertainment. And then I'll click send here. And let's see if it works. It should. Perfect. So you have spent a total of $257,000 on Spotify, $253,000 on Netflix, and $79,000 on Amazon. So, based on that, we can see that they obviously have the family plan, and they've got a bunch of folks that they're paying for on Netflix that weren't in the same household. It might have been less before the rule switched. But yes, this is exactly the type of stuff that we want to inject into our applications. Why is this important? And I'll stop sharing for a second. Why is this type of functionality important? It's because most of our applications, especially if we're building a SaaS platform, it's probably going to have this front end API database. And when you try to implement this stuff as like let's say a new SaaS business, you can take a lot of time to get those kind of base infrastructure there. And then when you start trying to implement search and all this natural language processing, it's much tougher to do. As you can see from what we built here, you can probably use this boilerplate to build out a good chunk of functionality if you're building a SaaS application or if you're trying to augment your SaaS application. Yeah, and that pretty much caps off everything that I wanted to cover today. Obviously, through webinars over the next weeks and months, we're going to continue to build on this type of stuff. And if you're building something SaaS related, or if you come across maybe something that you want me to dig into further, we have a great growth engineering team that can put together these types of demos, and I would love to help you to move your own projects forward. And yeah, I guess we can wrap up, Yukti. We're able to wrap up for the day. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this. And if you have any feedback, comments, definitely feel to reach out to me, Yukti, or any of the team here at SingleStore.
We can actually start with the questions now.
Sure,
are you
sure.
able
Do
to
we have
see?
a couple there?
Yeah, we actually have a lot of questions. So you're able to see the Zoom Q&A console?
I can, yes.
Oh, awesome. Then you can just pick out some questions, and if you want, I mean, I'll also be answering whatever I can. So if you want to, so for everyone, we are now officially starting the Q&A session. We will try to take up all the audience questions. So even if it's like a small question, feel free to ask it away. And Matt is here, and we have time till I think we have 12 more minutes. So feel free to add in everything. So yeah, Matt, do
Awesome.
you have anything that actually captures your eye right now?
Yeah, so let's see here. Exact value or a fuzzy index search. So that is a good question, Raphael. I'll start from the bottom and kind of move my way up. So you can obviously tweak that search a little bit further. I believe the way that we've created it right now and are using that GPT in the background, that it could technically be like a fuzzier index search. I will, if you want, if you're looking to kind of go a bit further into that, Yukti, we can probably share my email as well. If you email me, I can actually link you up with the growth engineer that helped me build this out, and he can give some more context on that as well. Now, the other one we've got here, let me just go back. So how do you address the problem with soft delete, like eventual data bloat, query complexity, foreign key constraint handling in SingleStore? So again, good question. The way that we do things is we don't have so we actually don't support foreign key constraints within our platform. So a lot of, as you start to bloat out the database, which even if you're a typical SaaS application, you're not going to have that issue necessarily on our platform. We don't really see that because we've built things with analytics in mind as well. You're not necessarily going to be able to, you're not going to run into the typical problems that you see at scale with stuff like MySQL or Postgres. What I would do is I would say it depends in terms of soft delete. It really depends on what kind of data you have. If it's something that you don't really care about, you could totally just hard delete it. What I've seen also people do in the past is create kind of an archive table. So they'll actually move that into an archive table. You could do that as well. You could do that based on a trigger. There's quite a few ways to do those types of things. And let me come up here. So how is chat completion tool able to support other languages? Currently, right now, based on our Node.js package, the way that I showed you today, it only is supported on Node.js, but we may have support for other languages coming soon. We started with Node.js. There is some guides that we will be creating over the next bit on kind of how to create that for yourself. It's relatively easy to do. If you let us know, like this is great feedback for us. If there's other languages you're looking to support, we would love that feedback, and we can definitely take that into our future endeavors. So with the connection pool stuff and the clusters question, I'd have to defer that actually to our engine team. I don't know if anybody is on the call from that team that would be able to explain a little bit more. What I can do is if you actually email me at mtanner@singlestore.com, I can actually get the right folks on the email thread for you and let you know if you want to know more about that. Switch to be option forwarded, stored proc, trigger functions, and data types. I can give you a bit more background on that too. If you want to pass through an email, I can get you an answer to all of your questions there, Manish. There will be a webinar replay available. Good question, Victor, around the NoSQL data sample. We'll actually probably tackle that in the next few weeks. I'm hoping to build out a Mongo to SingleStore type of migration project so I can show you how to take your existing Mongo API or UI and move that over into SingleStore without really changing much of the code. So be on the lookout for that. And then if I come down here, we got some more questions here. How does SingleStore support a graph structure? So we do have some stuff in the background that that one of our growth engineers, Akmal, has created that goes over essentially creating identity graphs and those types of things within the platform, not necessarily using graphs. We also did a similar we did SingleStore now a few weeks ago, and we have a great presentation on how to support large identity graphs, which might give you a little bit of background. We also have partners like PuppyGraph that allow you to connect to SingleStore and then use that to query as a graph database. So expanding on that multi-model type of approach. But yeah, there's quite a few ways that you can do that within the platform. All right, in corporate, we need to deal with less than perfect data quality. Status means different for each user. How to deal with it? Yeah, this is a totally have seen this before. In an ideal world, obviously you would standardize that data coming through. Now, what I would probably do is if I knew that that status was going to be, if I couldn't change it necessarily in the database enforcement, your next best bet would be to kind of override your API to make sure that you're doing some type of verification on the package coming through. So on the payload coming through. I know it doesn't really help that much in terms of maybe your current state, but there's probably not great ways to really deal with that currently if you have like different status for each user. How to handle deadlock situation when we use Node.js as single-threaded model. Would there be a reason why you would want to use it as a single-threaded model? I mean, optimally, you would handle everything asynchronously. or through, multi-threaded. But yeah, handling a deadlock situation. I would have to probably defer that to folks who are a little bit smarter than I am. Maybe if you can give a bit more background on that, we can definitely give you some insight in how to handle it. I'll get Yukti to actually give my email as well, and I'm happy to kind of forward these questions along, because if you folks are working in SingleStore, we want to make sure that your experience is good and that any questions that you have are answered. Incorporate RBAC, on the right level. This model for reg using SingleStore. Again, yeah. Actually, for when it comes to reg using SingleStore, we actually have two folks that really heavily focus on this in the webinars, which are going to be Akmal, and the other person that is very focused on the reg use cases is Yaroslav. So we can actually link you up with a couple of webinars that have been put on in the past that can help with reg. And then in terms of optimizing what you're doing, we can actually potentially hook you up with a quick call with a growth engineer as well to help you out with that if you need help. I think I've tackled most things there. Again, if there's something that I haven't fully touched on that you want to dig a bit deeper on, feel free to reach out to me. My email is mtanner@singlestore.com, and I can make sure that I can kind of forward your questions on to the right folks and get the answers that you need.
So I have put Matt's email into the replies of the relevant folks that where you mentioned that you need your email address. So I've already done that. So folks, if you're interested, feel free to reach out to Matt. And our team is generally very responsive. You can also email me. My email is included in the follow-up emails. So it's by the at singlestore.com. It's for the spelling and everything. It's right there in the follow-up email that you will be receiving after this webinar. I think after 10, 12 hours, you'll definitely get it. So I see a question from Praveen. Praveen, actually, we are all the recordings are present on our resources page, and you can access it over there. So someone very kindly had already put a link to our resources page, so I can actually link it up here for you. So yeah, if you
And
have
there's some really
any
cool stuff that we tackled a few weeks ago at SingleStore now, which I think look at a lot of the concepts that you folks are chatting about here. So definitely check out that content as well. If you go to our blog, you'll be able to see all of the synopsis and the live videos that were there.
So I think this is it, and we are actually able to finish on time this time. And thanks, Matt, for being so patient with everyone and hosting this session. And thanks everyone for attending. And if this session was interesting to you, feel free to attend tomorrow's session, which is with Alex. And this is that's on a similar topic. Uh, it's called building with Node.js on SingleStore. Building a full stack Next.js AI app. Sorry, this was today's title. So yeah. And on 30th, we are presenting developing a Gen AI application with SingleStore Helios on AWS and Anthropic 3. So this is a partner webinar. So if anyone's interested, feel free to attend that one as well. And the links to that will be also available on our resources page. Thanks for taking out the time and attending this session. Thanks, Matt, for planning this out and bringing this to life. And I hope to see you all again in our future sessions. So thanks and have